Now, concluding our series of interviews with party leaders in advance of Friday's general election, we're joined in studio by Simon Harris, leader of Fine Gael and outgoing TD for Wicklow. You're very welcome. Thanks indeed for joining us.
Thank you, David.
On 6-1, you claim to be the party that can be trusted on the economy, but your opponents took a look at your manifesto and they say it doesn't fully cover the cost of maintaining services, doesn't provide for a public sector pay deal and doesn't provide for any extra healthcare workers over the next 5 years. Can you really be trusted?
So our opponents would say that, wouldn't they? But of course, it's not the truth. The reality is that Fine Gael has outlined a very balanced and sensible approach to the next 5 years. We intend to spend about €52 billion in additional expenditure. That is less than the other two main parties. It's 27 billion less than Sinn Féin intend to spend. And we're actually keeping within what we call the 5% spending rule.
Which is interesting because you haven't kept within it once in the last 5 years.
That is a really fair point, and that's for very obvious reasons because we've lived through an inflation crisis. But the reality is there are storm clouds out there in terms of the economy, in terms of the global economy. What we have to be able to do is help people with the cost of living in the here and now. We can do that. Reduce permanently some costs like childcare costs, the cost of going to college. Invest in crucial infrastructure like housing, water and energy, but also put aside about 50 billion in a fund for that rainy day that we never know when can come to our country, but could well come soon.
OK. But if we look at your manifesto, and just to explain to viewers, what's referred to as existing level of service means keeping existing services going and taking account of demographics, growing population, ageing population, inflation, public sector pay deal, all the rest of it. Your manifesto for that and contingencies puts aside €17.2 billion over the course of 5 years, which sounds like a lot. But the Fiscal Advisory Council says the actual cost up to 2030 will be €22.6 billion. So according to their figures, there's a €5.5 billion hole in your manifesto.
So there's a difference in view in relation to this, and the Fiscal Advisory Council often has a different view with the government of the day in relation to that, what you call ELS, and explained to the viewers what that was. But I would make the point it's not comparing apples with apples. For example, the Fiscal Advisory Council includes the cost of increased estate pensions in that figure. We don't. We account for that with 2.6 billion in a separate section of our manifesto. But being honest, you can only spend what is available to the country. That is the truth of the matter. And we've told the Irish people what we believe to be available based on the Department of Finance figures. What we've actually done is we've actually allowed for extra levels of funding above and beyond what Pascal Donoghue has provided for in the last number of budgets. So I believe this is a sensible, balanced approach. It's what we can afford and it's what we believe will be available.
But it's less than the other parties are proposing to spend on existing level of service. It's less than the Fiscal Advisory Council, which is the body set up to stop us doing stupid things, says we actually need. And where in your figures is there scope for a public sector pay deal?
So I think I've explained why it's different to the Fiscal Advisory Council, because we've set aside for 2.6 billion in terms of pensions in a separate part of our manifesto. In relation to the public sector pay deal, that is allowed for in both the ELS and in our contingency fund. But as anyone who's ever negotiated a public sector pay deal knows, you never put that figure out there up front and centre because you negotiate that with the public sector unions. And you are right, other parties are committing to spend more. But David, they'll have to explain to you where they're going to find that money, because it involves breaching the spending rule with the Department of Finance, and it involves promising to spend money that our country may not have in the times ahead, and we've got to be prudent in relation to that.
Your manifesto doesn't appear to mention any extra healthcare staff. I've taken a look at it, I have it here. It does mention a number of GPs to be directly employed by the HSE, but it doesn't mention anything about money for extra nurses, extra consultants, extra healthcare workers generally.
But that's included in the ELS, so included in that 15
You're getting a lot out of that 15 billion.
Well, can I explain let me explain to the viewer what that is, because the 15.5 billion basically works out at about 3 billion extra that you can spend on public services each and every year. And of course that extra spending will involve the hiring of additional staff, extra teachers, extra nurses, extra doctors and extra others. We've also allocated for 6,000 extra Gardaí as well. But we do need to also go beyond.
Yes, but you've included that in your spending plans.
Correct. Well, that's the cost of the recruitment of them. But if I can make this point too, in relation to health, there's lots of parties promising big figures in terms of spending for health. My party is the only party proposing a multi-annual health budget that we would actually provide the health service with a clarity of funding for the next 5 years so they could plan and reform and break this cycle of overruns and annual budgets for health that delays reforms in the health service. OK,
let's talk about housing. You've been in power for the guts of 14 years. Fine Gael's record in that time. Homelessness has increased from 3,000 to nearly 15,000, a five-fold increase, including the number of homeless children going from just over 600 to 4,500. House prices have more than doubled, rents more than doubled. Why on earth would anyone think that you're the solution?
It's a very fair question, but I think the answer is that people watching this programme know that there's a context to all of this. They know that when Fine Gael came into office 14 years ago, the situation wasn't static, that we had to get rid of the IMF, about 14 years since they came into town now, on Friday. We had to get our country through Brexit, through COVID, and through the worst inflationary crisis of my lifetime. We now have something that we have rarely had in Ireland at the same time, money and a plan. We have seen progress on housing. Objectively, people can see new homes going up across the country. They can see 500 new people each week buying their new home, mortgage drawdowns up. And now we have a €40 billion plan for the next 5 years to deliver 303,000 new homes.
OK, people are aware that there's lots of difficulties with housing, but they might think that one of those difficulties is Fine Gael, and they might think that because of what your former colleague Owen Murphy, the former housing minister, said in his book. He said he had plans as housing minister. He wanted to declare a housing emergency so construction could be fast-tracked. He wanted to tax vacant properties. He wanted to turn NAMA into a home builder. All things which could have helped, all of which were turned down by Leo Varadkar and Paschal Donoghue.
Well, I think some of the people who are the most ardent critics of Owen Murphy now hold him up as the font of all wisdom on housing, which I think is some turnaround.
Well, you thought he was the font of all wisdom.
I think Owen Murphy is a very good and decent person. But I also know that Owen Murphy said in that book too that there were reasons why some things couldn't happen at that time, but Brexit and restoring our economic sovereignty had to be the priority. But we have done many of those things since. So if you look at the Land Development Agency, we've now set up an agency that others want to abolish that can build thousands of homes. I think up to 18,000 homes, including on public lands. I've stood in some of those homes in Shanganagh, not far from here in County Dublin.
We may discuss your encounter in Kanturk in a moment, but the issue underlying it is a very important one: pay parity for Section 39 workers, people working in voluntary organisations providing services for the state in areas like health and disability. You've promised pay parity in your manifesto. Yesterday, unions went into a meeting with government officials and were told by those officials, your officials, they had no mandate to negotiate.
Yeah, well, that's not a satisfactory position, and you heard myself and other government leaders speak to this, because in the public sector pay talks only a little while ago, it's already been agreed that we need to bring about pay parity for Section 39. These are voluntary organisations, but they're providing vital services to people, including in areas like disability and elder care. I'm making it very clear that this is a commitment we are going to deliver on. There were talks due to schedule, quite separate and distinct to the general election campaign and anything that happened during it. And I guarantee you that if I'm back as Taoiseach in a few days' time, we will absolutely resolve that issue. Not just because it's important for workers, which it is, but actually more importantly, it's important for service users and making sure we can properly staff those disability services.
Can I ask you about something else in your manifesto, the Acorn savings scheme? Because some people might look at this and think, that's kind of peak Fine Gael, because the plan allows for €1,000 donated by the state and is put into a savings account. State guarantees 4% return. Children who are in families on social welfare will get €1,500. That'll be put away with compound interest at the end of the day. That'll turn into something like €3,000. People who can afford to put in €2,000 a year, they'll end up with a fund at the end of it of €53,000. You take away the money they put in, the gain from the state is €18,000. So the rich kid benefits by 5 times as much as the poor kid, and you've actually said that this is going to help tackle inequality. It won't help tackle inequality, it'll magnify it.
No, because of course it's not the only thing we're proposing. In fact, it's one of a number of things we're proposing to help children and to help tackle child poverty. Remember, we've established a child poverty unit in the Department of Taoiseach. I want to see things like a second tier of child benefit come in. But on the Acorn scheme, I fully stand behind it. It's €68 million, right? €68 million.
At a time when there's over 4,000 children homeless.
But again, I don't mean this rudely, it's not an either or matter. It's about actually trying to do a number of things. This is about creating a culture of saving, and I don't buy into the extreme of it's either 53,000 or 3,000. For many people watching this programme, for many parents, they'll try to put aside a few bob for their kids on birthdays and Christmases, Holy Communion times. And actually, I think the truth will be many people will be in the middle of those figures. We've seen in the past other parties have brought in SSIA schemes. They've been less targeted. They've been less about children. This is actually about creating a culture of saving for our children's future. And I think it's a good thing to do. And they've done it in a number of other countries, Canada, the US, Singapore.
It's exactly three weeks since you sat in that chair and confirmed that the election would be on Friday. Since then, I don't think things have gone entirely to plan for you. You've lost about a quarter of your support in the last opinion poll that we saw. Why have things gone so wrong?
Well, firstly, I think it's certainly a fair comment. Election campaigns probably never quite go to plan. They do take on a dynamic. But can I say this? There's far too many pundits trying to really write the outcome of the election before we've had the election.
No, just observing the campaign in motion.
And I don't mean that in relation to you, but I kind of hear this on a daily basis. Who'll get what department? What will the coalition options be after the government, after the general election? No votes have been cast except some postal votes. It is all to play for. I believe this is a three-course contest, for want of a better word, in terms of the three larger parties on roughly 20% apiece. When a general election is called, the people of Ireland press reset. Irish people think about their vote long and hard before they put the Pian Louis beside anybody's name. And I think that's what's happening right now. They're making us work for their support quite rightly. And I've enjoyed talking to the Irish people right across this country about how Fine Gael has a plan to help with the cost of living, to help deliver crucial infrastructure like housing, and to prepare for any economic shocks that might visit our country. And I really believe we're competitive, and I believe we can do very well in this election, and I believe we can lead the next government.
You've admitted that you were wrong in your encounter with Charlotte Fallon in Kanturk, and fair enough, you've apologised. There's no need to go over it again. You also said that there's no one more annoyed with me than me. Are you sure about that? Because I'd say there's a fair few Fine Gael candidates that are a bit peeved.
Well, what I meant was this. I mean, I was a 16-year-old young man who got involved in politics watching my own mother cry with frustration when we couldn't get proper services and supports for my brother with autism. I know what it's like, and that's why on this one issue, above and beyond all, I was really annoyed with myself. Fine Gael candidates right across the country know how hard I've been working to regenerate and rejuvenate this party. And we're in this election to win it. Let me absolutely assure you, and not to win it for Fine Gael, to win it for our plan that we have for the future of this country. And we're as passionate about that today as I was when I took over this job 7 months ago.
One of those candidates is John McGahern. You seem to be tiptoeing away from him at the moment. You said today that you didn't know whether you would invite him to canvass with you if and when you go to Louth. Surely to God, somebody in Fine Gael would have realised at some stage that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to run this guy.
Yeah, I'm being very honest about this, David, because I suppose you have to balance a number of things. 6 years ago, this violent incident happened. He was then found not guilty by a court of his peers of criminal assault. If he had been found guilty, he wouldn't be running for That's important. No, but it is important to say he was found not criminally guilty. Yes. He was had to pay a very heavy fine, quite rightly, and was democratically selected by members.
Okay, but you have a code of conduct in your party. I've seen it mentioned in relation to another individual. Is it not against the code of conduct of your party to be brawling outside a pub after closing time?
Well, I certainly think it was utterly inappropriate behaviour. I'm very clear in relation to that. And I do think we'll have to reflect further on these matters into the future. The reality right now, though, is there's a general election on in 36 hours or thereabouts. There are 2 candidates selected to run for Fine Gael in Louth. I'm asking people to vote Fine Gael in Louth. I want to be able to continue as your Taoiseach. I want to be able to lead a government. And I'm asking people to vote Fine Gael. And they have a choice. Paula Butterley is on the ticket. John McGahern's on the ticket. They need to look at candidates in the round and decide who they wish to lend their support to.
If you're back in government with Fianna Fáil, is a rotating Taoiseach arrangement a red line for you?
So I shudder at this because it gets into this space of arrogantly trying to predict the outcome of the election. I've refused to do that right throughout the campaign. I think the people haven't decided, I think, the outcome of this election. If there is a coalition government, I think the parity that we've had in this government has worked well. But the first thing that we'll have to talk about is policies. There are policy differences between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in this election on a range of issues, including how we support small businesses, amongst other things. This is in the first instance about policy, and the very first instance about asking people to vote for us on Friday. OK,
Simon Harris, leader of Fine Gael, thanks for joining us on 6-1. And that is the last of our interviews with the 10 main party leaders here on the 6-1. You can look back at all of them in full on the RT website and RT News app, where, of course, you'll find all of the latest news and developments too.